Midnight Mass is written and directed by Mike Flanagan and is his third limited or mini-series that he's done for Netflix surrounding a horror-based story. This time around, the show is about a small, isolated island community who has had people consistently just leaving them to the point where there's only dozens of people left there, and the community's dying. It has no economy, it doesn't have any funding, it's basically going under, and everybody that's still there is there more out of obligation than actually wanting to be there. But the show is mainly centered around Riley Flynn, who is played by Zach Gilford, his return to the island to be back with his family after spending some time in prison for an accident. A very traumatic accident. And at the same time that Riley gets back, a young new priest arrives to temporarily replace a much older priest that was kind of the head of the church in that community. And the young priest is played by Hamish Linklater. And once he's arrived, small, strange occurrences start happening in the community, and some of those occurrences do seem to be miracles. And that's generally as far as I will get into what the actual story is for this show, just the synopsis of what the concept is, because I don't want to spoil this for anybody, because this show, I had no idea where it was going, and I was very pleasantly surprised. Now, like I've said before on my channel, Mike Flanagan is one of my favorite horror creators of the modern era. He is able to bring real human drama and emotion into these horror stories that really helps connect people with the actual movie and the story going on and what's happening to these characters. His best effort to date was probably The Haunting of Hill House, which was fantastic. And for myself, supernatural horror scares me the most, so that one scared me quite a bit. So it was a good mixture of actual good storytelling along with actual scares. And with Midnight Mass, I think he has solidified, at least for me, as the best horror writer-director working today. Because something that seems to be more of a trend with what he's done with Midnight Mass and The Haunting of Bly Manor, his second series that he did for Netflix, is that he is making a horror-based show, but he's focused more on telling thought-out stories that use horror themes to kind of accentuate what's going on, and that's true here. This show, for me, wasn't quite as scary as like The Haunting of Hill House, and a lot of people had that same criticism with The Haunting of Bly Manor, is that it's not as scary. However, for what this show does, probably more so than Bly Manor, it actually uses that to great effect, because this show is dripping in atmosphere. It is mainly tackling religious horror, which is always unsettling because of the history behind religions and everything, and whatever message it's trying to send behind that. But it's also tackling a very philosophical look on life, which surprised me. This show is written in a way that feels very, very personal, and it feels like Mike Flanagan put a lot of what his philosophy on life and death is into these characters in this show, which was really entertaining to see. And I do think this show is incredibly well written. Like I said before, it is unpredictable in what it's doing, but it also makes a lot of sense in what happens. You're able to understand what they're going for and everything, and the characters are so well thought out in the amount of screen time that they have that you do become attached to them and care for them. And it's also really well balanced, where a lot of the dialogue none of the dialogue really feels forced, it feels genuine. There are a lot of monologues throughout the show from an assortment of characters, and it kind of keys you into their thought process and how they approach society and other people and all these other things. And that's why I think Mike Flanagan excels in this longer format of limited series rather than movies. While I love his movies, I think they're fantastic, his limited series give the characters time to develop and really sit in this environment, and it works really, really well, especially with this, because the concept, of course, is about a very small community being affected by very strange events. And it's all based around this young priest that has come into their community. And that's another thing, is that this show also does, of course, tackle religion. And it doesn't give any one message about why religion is good or bad. It gives a nuanced message about how some people, of course, do weaponize religion to get what they want out of it. And then it also shows why people have faith and why people believe in religion and how it is good for a lot of people. But it also shows the blindness that can come with it, and how a lot of people can get away with stuff under the guise of religion. So the show is exceedingly well written. It's tackling a lot of different stuff within this community, but also, with it tackling all those different things, it does make everything feel well-rounded enough, and every character feel like a three-dimensional character. And because you care about these characters, that helps the show feel scarier, because a lot of this show has to do more with existential dread. And like I said before, it does tackle philosophy about life and existentialism when it comes to death. And that's kind of what anchors a lot of what happens in this show. And there are definitely parts that are scary. Flanagan's really good at making creepy imagery and making you feel uncomfortable in an environment, which I love. Horror that's like that, where you feel just unnerved by where the characters are. So this is right down my alley for horror I do like, even if I didn't think it was as scary as a lot of other horror stories. But I do think that it's a better horror story than a majority of a lot of horror that I've seen, just in general. So of course the writing is good. Mike Flanagan's directing is great. I think it kind of speaks for itself within his own writing. He is able to direct that very well, and does introduce a lot of compelling imagery within the show. But one thing I really want to talk about is the acting in this show is phenomenal. There are some returning actors who've been in several of his other shows, like Alex Esso, Katie Siegel, Rahul Kahil, Henry Thomas, and Robert Longstreet. And they are all fantastic in their roles. They're very believable in their roles. They bring a really good presence to it. Initially, throughout the first couple episodes, I didn't think Zachary Guilford was as good of a choice as like the center role as a different actor could be, but then I was proven wrong with where the show does go and where its focus shifts and what it does with his character. He's also really, really good in the show. But the two main performances that I really hope get some attention around awards season, and I think these two actors deserve Emmys for their performances, and that's Samantha Sloyan, which I apologize if I got that last name wrong, as Bev Keane. She is one of the most irritating TV characters probably ever, especially in a horror show, because she is everything that's wrong with religious people. Very, very judgmental and very demeaning and condescending, and thinks very highly of herself. It's basically within her first scene, you know what type of character she is, and you hate her throughout the entire thing. And that is a lot of credit to Samantha, because she does an amazing job in the role, because you hate the character almost immediately, but she is very, very good in it. And then the one that I think really stole the show is Hamish Linklater as Father Paul. He brings a lot to the table in his performance because his character has to be several different things. His character has to be convincing as a priest, because of course he is a priestly character, but he also does need to be mysterious, he needs to be charming, he needs to be well spoken, but he also has to have a darker presence to him because of that mystery that you don't know what exactly is going on with him and why he's replacing temporarily this other priest, so you don't know what's going on with him. And Hamish Linklater is all of those things. He's very entertaining to watch, he's very charming, and he brings so much to the role, and he really does help improve the show overall by just elevating it just a little bit more with his performance. And like I said, I really, really hope to see more from him. Especially, like, I've only seen a couple things with Hamish Linklater, and I've always thought he was good in those, but I do think that this is his career best performance, from what I've seen at least. He's amazing in the show. And as far as the show's horror itself, like I said before, I do really like its approach. Is a very uncomfortable environment, dripping in atmosphere, incredibly stressful, very anxiety-inducing. The 6th episode especially has one of the best sequences in any horror media that I would say ever. Very much so like the 5th episode of The Haunting of Hill House. It's one of those sequences that really sticks with you and it really stresses you out. I was on my feet pacing in front of the TV because it stressed me out so much. And I don't do that a lot with stuff that I watch. The last time I remember doing that was like the 7th season of Game of Thrones or whatever, years ago. So that says a lot for how invested this show got me into it and its characters, because like I've said before, the characters are incredibly well written, and when they're put into a situation where you think something's going to happen to them, it stresses you out. And Flanagan does an incredible job tackling that. He makes you care about these characters so much, and then of course adds the horror element to it, and it's like, oh, Jesus Christ, this is intense. The show is also incredibly heartfelt. Its philosophical touching points are used incredibly well for the characters. It helps the show keep its emotional core, and a lot of the show, especially by the end, there's a lot of catharsis that it feels like that goes throughout the show, because it almost feels like these characters are going through their own therapy, experiencing these things, and it's a very well executed concept and a really interesting show to watch. And I do almost automatically want to watch it again. I only finished it a couple hours ago and I want to talk about it, but I found myself very emotionally affected by it, by the end of it, and by the end of certain episodes, of course, and everything. The only criticism I would have is that the show's pace does feel a little slow by the middle of it, like 3rd and 4th episode or so. It does drag a little bit, but I can't even say that that was really to the show's detriment, because it lets you kind of stew in this environment and these characters and develop with them as it goes along, and that works really, really well for its climax and its payoff. And I think the show is great. I highly recommend it to anybody who wants to watch a good horror show. I'm sure if you're watching it, you've already watched Flanagan's other shows and are familiar with his work, but I highly recommend it if you don't know his work and you're on the fence about watching this. I think you should watch it. So I'm going to be rating Midnight Mass a 9.5 out of 10. What did you guys think about it? What is your favorite of the limited series shows that Mike Flanagan has done for Netflix? Let me know, and I'll be back with another video.